It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
So, folks, it is a real pleasure to have Betz Laffer back on the show. You all know him as probably the world's greatest economist, and certainly the most famous. You all have heard of the Laffer curve. He was Ronald Reagan's chief economist. He has served Donald Trump in a similar capacity, a living legend, and most importantly, Arthur Laffer and I are just finishing up a book that will be out this fall called The Trump Economic Miracle. And Arthur, great to have you on. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure, Steve. My pleasure. I love that title of the book.
Well, you know who came up with that title?
I do know. You tell them. It's amazing. He told you it came from
it's just
him.
a quick, funny story. I mean, Arthur and I met with Trump. What was that? About a couple months ago. We had that dinner with him, and we told him about this book. And he said, "Well, what's the title of that book?" And the working title at that time was Trumponomics 2.0, because Laffer and I wrote a book, I don't know, 5 years ago called Trumponomics. And he said, "I don't like that title. Why don't you call it this new title, the Trump Economic Miracle?" And that's just so much like Donald Trump. He thinks big. What did you think of his speech, Arthur? And what did you think of his economic message?
Well, I think his economic message is just straight on. I just love it, love it, love it. And, a long speech like that, I had to look at snippets later, Steve. I'm a
right,
guy.
yeah.
I go to bed early.
I didn't listen to the whole thing. I listened to the first 45 minutes. It went on a bit too long, but the economics was good.
Well, I didn't think it went on too long. I mean, when you have a orator like Donald Trump and you can see what he does at the rallies and stuff, I just think he's a great speaker. But I'm just older and I went to bed and look for people like you to give snippets that gave the thing. And all the snippets were great. He's a uniter. He's not a divider. He's pro-growth, not anti-growth. He's not a redistributionist. He's a reward, good behavior. And that I just love. And, he wants to do drill, baby, drill. He wants price transparency for health care. He wants tax cuts. He wants spending restraint. He wants freer trade. I mean, all of this stuff, it's just great. I just love what he's doing.
Let me go back to that last point you just made, because one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is there's kind of a debate going on about what Donald Trump thinks about trade. He is, sometimes he calls himself tariff man, and he's proposed this 10% across the board tariff. And some of our free trade friends that are, you and I are free traders. So you think that Donald Trump is a free trader?
I do. And I think he thinks he's a free trader as well. Uh-huh. But that's just, you have to talk to him to get a correct answer. But that's my vision of Donald Trump, and that he's using tariffs as a negotiating tool to bring other countries down to the table to negotiate tariff cuts, quota cuts, and regulatory cuts. And that's the right thing to do, because all some of these countries care about is just access to the U.S. market, and tariffs frighten them, and so they'll come to the table.
Well, his book is called The Art of the Deal, and I've never seen anybody as master a negotiator as Donald Trump is. And I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, that he's used tariff as a tool to get other countries to do things that are America's economic and national security interests. Well, you are a master negotiator too. Getting Ann to say yes to marriage was a real big negotiation. And
you did well.
She wants to renegotiate that deal. But by the way, Arthur is talking about my lovely wife, Ann, who I finally, I got a few drinks in her and finally got her to say yes. And all they have to do, Arthur, is say yes one time.
Yep, that's right. And that's the same thing with a trade deal, too.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. Okay, you just sent me the last chapter of the book a couple of days ago, which I love, where you talk about, okay, here are the 2 or 3 or 4 things you think that Trump should do right out of the gate. And I would love for you to tell our audience. I want people to buy the book, so don't spoil the ending. But
Okay.
tell folks what some of the things that you think Trump could do right out of the gate when he becomes elected.
Well, the obvious things are the pump baby drill, and extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, all of that sort of experiment. Everyone knows that. But what I'd like to see him do is do something to have a short run, bam, get the economy jumping. And that would be to have a 50% waiver of the payroll tax, both on employers and employees, for 18 months, and a 100% expensing of capital purchases, again, for 18 months. So to get them off the sidelines, back into the labor force, and get things really jumpstart the overall economy. And that really would do it. We need to get the economy popped back up. And if that happens, Steve, the way they do deficits and what's the effect on the budget, that would be a huge, huge revenue raiser, because once you got those growth rates up, all sorts of tax revenues come in, all sorts of welfare programs diminish, and the effect of that over a 10-year period would be an enormous increase in the surplus or the reduction in the deficit of the U.S.
Well, also, you're talking about a 7.5% pay raise, essentially, for 6 months for every worker. So that would negate some of the real losses that people have suffered under Biden's policy. So I like that aspect of it.
Oh,
how long would you do that payroll tax cut?
I said 18 months, but, obviously this is all negotiable. But you want to make it long enough so people have a chance to really get the advantage of it. Yeah. And then you pop it back up to where it otherwise would have been. Once they're on the job and haven't had that job for a year, then you can do that and bring it back. But, you really want to get them off their duff, off the sidelines, and bring them back into the mainstream of the labor force, which we lost huge amounts of people during COVID-19 and that whole lockdown period. And this would bring them back online and get them up and going, which is really important for this country. It has so many wonderful side effects.
Well, there's something like 5 or 6 million. I don't know what your number is, but I estimate about 5 or 6 million, mostly men, by the way, they could be and should be working and are not. And we're, essentially, I mean, I learned this from you. If you pay people not to work, and you get people not working, and if you give people a pay raise, you'll get them to work more. I mean, is that?
Yeah. And the neat thing about payroll tax rate cut is it not only brings people off the sidelines and back into work, your 5 million number, that's true, but it also gets people who are employed now to work overtime and to work more.
Yes.
And, it's just across the board, the right incentives for people to excel. It increases productivity, it increases labor force participation rates, and it increases capital incentives to capitalize our workforce more and to create the prosperity that we really desperately need quickly, Steve. Quickly is the answer.
So I'm talking to Arthur Laffer, the great economist and the co-author of the forthcoming book with the other famous economist extraordinaire, Steve Moore. I'm just kidding, folks.
Arthur is the one
who's the economist extraordinaire. But the book, the name of that book, it's coming out. Hopefully we'll have that out. By early to mid-September, is called The Trump Economic Miracle. The title did come from Donald J. Trump, but it was a miracle.
We're trying to get him to do the forward to it as well.
We are. We're going to have him do the forward.
I think it's a good chance. He did the forward to my book, Taxes Have Consequences, and he's just wonderful to work with. He really is.
So tell us, we got a few minutes left, and I know that you don't normally work on a Saturday, so it's nice of you to join us. So you got the payroll tax cut. Then you said expensing. Now, will you explain to people why that's important?
Yeah, well, expensing increases the internal rate of return on capital investment. If you get to depreciate your capital in 1 year, that means that you get save on taxes up front, and that really increases the rate of return on investment. So everyone who's thinking about investing in the goods market and capital will want to accelerate that investment so they can get advantage of 100% expensing right away, rather than dribbled out
over 10,
depreciation schedules over a number of years.
So, in other words, if
really, really important.
So, if a company wants to buy machinery or equipment or build a new plant or any kind of capital expenditure, they are now going to have an incentive to do it right now because they'll get that.
Yeah, and even with inflation the way it is, Steve, and even though it's come down, the inflation has come down somewhat. it's still with stuff that's depreciated over, let's say, 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You only can replace the cost basis. So
Yep.
by having that depreciation, you really under depreciate the capital equipment if you have a long schedule of depreciation
Because of inflation.
Yeah, because of inflation. You know, that's not indexed, by the way. And if you have 100% expensing, you'll get that replacement value right up front, and it will be to the full amount.
Now, Joe Biden, we've only got a few minutes left, but Joe Biden wants to do the opposite. He wants to double the capital gains tax. He wants to tax unrealized capital gains. He wants to, one of your favorite taxes I know is the death tax, and he wants to basically double the death tax. By the way, why do you hate the death tax so much?
Well, the way I read, I hate the death tax. It's the single worst tax I've ever heard of. You can earn your money fair and square, pay your taxes, and have that after-tax income, Steve. You can go to Vegas, you can carouse, you can gamble, you can drink, and you can smoke. And as far as my government's concerned, that's fine. Go right ahead. But if you want to give that money to your kids or someone else's kids, anyone's kids, if you want to give that money away, they're going to tax you. And he wants to have taxes up to 45% or something like that.
Yeah.
That is the most anti-American, anti-family, anti-growth policy I have ever heard of, and it's immoral in the first order. Death taxes should not be allowed, period.
Well, I think about somebody like my dad, who was a businessman. So, was working when I was growing up as a kid. He was working 60 hours a week to build up this business. Did pretty well. Probably, I don't know what the value of the company was at $10 or $20 million when he retired. And now, by the way, he paid his income taxes, he paid his payroll taxes, he paid the employees' taxes, all that stuff. And then after all that, a lifetime of paying taxes, then the government's going to take half of it away when he dies.
There you go. It's really immoral. And it's bad economics. It's really, you want people to work and save and pass capital on to the next generation. You don't want to discourage it.
So I want to add one last thing to that list of immediate things to do, Arthur. I want to index the capital gains tax for inflation. You were just talking about the inflation effect and how it hurts investment. Can you live with that one?
I love it. No, I love it. That's one of the ones I think is,
Good.
Trump was very, very pro that during his first term, just never basically got around to doing it. But I love it, love it, love it. But as far as getting the economy jump-started, that won't do it. The one that will do it is the payroll tax waiver for 18 months, half, and for expensing of capital. That'll jumpstart the economy, which we really need.
So what the other thing we really need is for you to either be the next Treasury Secretary or the next National Economic Council chief economist for Trump. All right. My producer is yelling at me saying we got to go.
Because that's not going to happen, Steve.
All
But
right,
thank you for saying that.
I hope it does. All right, Arthur, we got to go. Got a hard break. Thanks so much for joining. And this is the More Money Show.
To the teachers, assistants, and support staff who see potential in every child, Grand Canyon University recognizes you. We created the National Center for Teacher Preparation at GCU, along with a generous scholarship, so you can become a licensed teacher with paid benefits. Over 100 GCU alumni have been recognized award recipients, including Superintendent, Administrator, and Teacher of the Year. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu/parapro.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is Steve Moore. This is the More Money Show. And we were talking earlier about the fact that our transportation system is essentially shut down. You just heard the news report that the Biden administration has been completely incompetent in dealing with this. And the reason I bring this up is my next guest, a good friend, Hogan Gidley. You all know Hogan. He was one of the major spokesman for Donald Trump when he was president in his first term. And I hope you return to that job, Hogan, in the second term. But first of all, you were telling me you're stuck in the Atlanta airport. You had to sleep there last night. These kinds of screw ups did not happen when Donald Trump was president.
No, they didn't. But listen, I don't know if you're worried at all. I'm not. I'm sure Pete Buttigieg has this all
Right.
ready to. He'll be down with his hard hat and his little orange vest in no time. But
well, he's going to be there on his bicycle.
Yeah, that's right. After he takes a plane and a gas guzzling SUV, then he hops on that bike the last 500 yards. Listen, it's a disaster. Everyone here is really cranky and upset, and for good reason.
Yeah. Did you actually have to sleep in the Atlanta airport last night?
I did. I didn't sleep.
Oh,
though,
I'm
but
so
my
that's
flight
horrible.
got canceled at 3 a.m. and then I thought, well, why leave? Because I can try to take one of those first flights out, of course, and then that didn't happen. So we've been kind of all sitting around. There are reporters here, and they all know how bad it is. So look, hey, that's part of it, and it's still not taking me down off that high we had.
Right, exactly. Well, I just want to point out, though, that I want to reemphasize this point, that you've got basically a guy who was a star in business, built things, ran great companies, and then you've got a guy who's been in politics for 50 years, who knows nothing about business, nothing about how things work, and you get these kind of, this just should not happen in America in 2024. And the fact that you have people like Pete Buttigieg, who knows nothing about transportation, is running the show. It's a perfect example of why we have to bring in a new administration. Donald Trump is a great businessman himself. I just had on the air before you came on Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, a very successful businessman. I'd love to see him. Maybe he could. I bet he would turn this thing around too. So anyway, it's terrible though. I really feel for you. So tell us about what you thought was. Well, no, hold on. I've been asking. I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time, Hogan, and I know my audience wants to know this too. When you were essentially the press secretary for Donald Trump. When I used to go to those press I would just observe them, and I went to a couple of them in person, and I was struck by how hostile, openly hostile the media was to Donald Trump. I had never seen that before. Even when Ronald Reagan was president, it wasn't like they were seething with hatred for him. And am I exaggerating that?
Oh, no, of course not. And now what you have is a complete inverse. So all the data and metrics showed 93% negative coverage against Donald Trump. And when you had record-setting success in the economy with record high employment for African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic women, you'd think they'd have one or two good stories in there, but nope. They did 93% negative coverage, and we had a couple of folks in that briefing room who were fair and would ask some good questions, Fox, Newsmax, and others. Right. But everybody else was against this. Now it's the complete opposite. What you have in that room are a bunch of folks who basically just take dictation from whatever the White House says. They don't push back. They write whatever and carry the water, however, Joe Biden administration asks them to do. And so I find it funny to watch Joe Biden now find himself, when a journalist asks a real question, he had to know how to answer it. When Karine Jean-Pierre gets pushed at all, she had to know how to handle it, because they're never pushed on the left, because ideologically
never.
They're
never.
in total line with the press. So it's a complete difference in what we had, obviously.
So when you were doing that job, and you did it masterfully, almost every question you were asked was hostile.
Sure. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
They didn't like the policies, so they're in line with the left right off the top. So every question was tinged with at least some bit of bias to their own mentality. They couldn't just report the story. They had to do it negatively, regardless of what the issue was. And you'd think, after all the record-setting successes I mentioned, I don't care if they write all good stories, but you think they'd have one or two slip in there every once in a while. And it just wasn't that way. They just hated him so much. And, that people always joke about Trump derangement syndrome. And I think it used to be something that the right would kind of needle the left and say these people are so crazy about Trump that they hate him so much. They suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. Ha, ha, ha. I think it's like a real medical condition.
Oh, I do too.
I think they're going to write medical journals on it for sure.
Yes. No, I 100% agree with you. Having served myself with Trump, and people it's like they become completely irrational when it comes to Trump, even when he does things that are heroic. Have you seen this new thing? The media saying, "Oh, he shouldn't have that bandage on his ear."
Yeah, the same media that says he should not have the bandage, it's superfluous, is the same media that told us you have to wear a mask.
Exactly.
No science at all behind that. Yeah, give me a break. The guy was shot in the face. They can try and spin that however they want to, but everyone saw what happened. And, he's a millimeter away from death. And when he walked out on that convention floor the first night, it was incredible in large part because you could see on his face what really was gratefulness. Not just to the people to the people in the crowd, not just the folks who were cheering his name, or that he picked a vice president, the nominee was finally done, or his nomination was formalized. It was grateful to be alive. You could see it on his face. He knows the difference. And look, a millimeter changed the course of this country's future. And don't forget, he's a golfer. He knows what a millimeter means. You make the putt or you miss the putt. So he understands that distance.
That's a great point. And he's a very good golfer at that. I've had the honor of playing golf with him, and he's just by the way, I don't know if I ever told you my golf story with Donald Trump, but I was very nervous. I was playing in one of those scramble events with a bunch of other people. And I was so nervous. And I just went up to him and I said, Mr. President, I just have to tell you, I'm not a very good golfer. And he stuck his big hands on my shoulders. He's a big guy, as you know. And he looks right at me. I said, Steve, I don't care if you're a good golfer or a bad golfer. All I care about is that you play fast. So I played as fast as I could. But he, by the way, he is really a good golfer. I mean, he hits the ball a ton, and he's a good putter. Speaking of millimeters, so I wanted to ask you, if I could, Hogan, about the story that was. I think this is one of the biggest cover-ups in the history of the United States with respect to the media. And by the way, I'm talking about the media covering up a story, which is Joe Biden's mental health, and they covered up the story for at least the last 18 months. It's amazing. None of the news outlets were reporting what those of people around Biden knew was that he was not. And by the way, I'm not being derisive. We're all getting older, but can you believe this? I mean, how could the media be on such a massive cover up?
I mean, how could they be on a cover up on Russia collusion or anything else? I mean, listen. Whenever there was a story that came out of the FBI, they would call me immediately and say, hey, listen, we have a source at the FBI that's saying X. And I was like, okay, and I would have to find out and give them the information. When the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal happened, and Biden was saying, I wasn't told anything about this by my generals, I thought to myself, where are all those sources from the FBI and the CIA and the Pentagon? No one, you journalists couldn't be bothered to call. Also, the Hunter Biden laptop, you could even call one of those sources you had when we were in the White House. It's because they didn't want to know, or if they did, they didn't care. The same thing applies here. Yeah. They know the guy's old, he's frail, he's feeble, he's fragile. They've always known this, but they have to feign surprise because otherwise they're culpable in this cover-up. But we all see it for what it is. I mean, there's a reason that the media's popularity is somewhere between Congress and COVID, because they're always lying to us about everything. And this is a great example of it. And now they're openly basically saying, watch me use the levers of power and influence we have in the media and get Biden off the ticket. Watch how powerful we are. It shows you that the tail is wagging the dog.
So I'm talking to the great Hogan Gidley, who was one of the premier press assistants for Donald Trump and handled the press masterfully for him. And that's a tough job. I know. I don't know how you did it, but I want to remind by the way, he is stuck in the Atlanta airport. He's been there for 24 hours because of the incompetence of the Biden administration and this transportation fiasco that's going on around the country. And it angers me that this is still kind of thing is happening in the United States. These kinds of things did not happen when Donald Trump was president. By the way, folks, I will be taking your calls in a few minutes on that More Money hotline, 1-800-848-9222. Hogan, Trump, having, again, watched some of these press conferences when he was president and still, when the press deals with him, how does he even maintain a stiff upper lip? I mean, how does he – half the time I feel like I want to just punch these people. They were so obnoxious. How does he hold it together?
Well, he loves the fight. That's part of it. He loves to fight. And also, one of the reasons they hated him so much, the media hated him, is because he didn't need them to get his message out. Whether you loved or hated the tweet.
That's right.
You got to know every moment of every day what he was thinking, and he didn't have to use the filter of the mainstream media to get that information to you.
He went around the filter.
Yeah, right? they resented that. And so for him, he knew he kind of had the upper hand in that way. It's still frustrating when you're sacrificing all he sacrifices to try and make people's lives better and accomplish really good things to the American people, and the media don't even report it accurately, much less write a good story. I know it's frustrating to him because we've talked about it many times. But he asked me one time, he said, who's the worst and which ones are the worst to us? And I try to say it's the ones that try and portray themselves as real news outlets when they're actually giving you biased or opinionated information. Those are the worst. If it's an opinion show and they're giving opinion, that's fine because you know that. It's the ones that try and be high and mighty and pretend as though they're the paragon of journalistic virtue, but instead they're the ones actually giving all the opinions. Those are the ones that are most dangerous to the American people.
And these are the ones who accuse Trump and people like you and me of distributing misinformation or disinformation. And they're the ones who are actually doing this. So last question, Hogan, and I'll let you go because I know you're stuck there in the Atlanta airport, is how do we fix it? How do we fix this media? I mean, you're right in all your criticisms. It wasn't like this, 25 years ago. Is the media fixable? It's supposed to be the fourth estate. They're supposed to be telling us stuff, and they're covering up things.
The legacy media probably not, but I'll tell you the reason they're kind of trying to mind their P's and Q's at least a little bit better is because of shows like yours and other outlets that are more conservative based. Right. I mean, when you have the emergence of something like the Daily Wire or Newsmax or Fox News or RAV, Real America's Voice, then all of a sudden they have competition. And they don't like competition. They like to be the only ones out there saying, what they think is real. But when you have so many other outlets now emerging
that's a great
and
point.
Younger outlets coming out, then all of a sudden they have to realize that they're losing viewership. And it's because they've been lying to people for a long time, and the American people are fed up with it. They want news. And look, news has basically become the editorial page. You turn on to be affirmed or you turn on to yell at the other person. Right.
Right.
There are very few news outlets anymore, but with the emergence of conservative media, it really is putting kind of a gut check on the whole process now.
I think that's a great point. We're on WABC radio. We're the number one talk radio station in the country. And it's because I think people turn to us exactly for that reason, Hogan. They do not and cannot believe the mainstream media, and they are able to turn to. By the way, conservative talk radio isn't really that old. It's only about 25 years that we've had this. Well, Hogan, you are a great American. I can't wait to be working with you again in Trump 2.0. And I hope you get home safely because there's nothing worse than being stuck at an airport. That's Hogan Gidley.
Me too. I feel like a Cub reporter out for the Steve Moore show out here in the
there you go.
Reporting live from the Atlanta airport.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Hogan. We'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.